The moment the world's youngest billionaire heard the simple word, no, something inside him shattered. For years, every door had opened before he even reached it. Money erased obstacles, power silenced opposition, and success made people smile before he spoke. Yet the one woman who cleaned his mansion every morning looked him in the eyes without fear, refused everything he offered, and quietly walked away as though his fortune meant absolutely nothing. He thought he had been rejected by someone who didn't understand what he could give. He had no idea that she was about to teach him what no amount of money could ever buy. Before we begin, if you believe kindness is stronger than pride, and that everyone deserves a second chance, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone you love, and subscribe to Kindness Speaks. Your support helps us bring more heart-touching stories that remind the world compassion still exists. Alexander Hayes had everything that magazines described as success. At only 38 years old, he owned international companies, private jets, luxury hotels, and estates scattered across continents. Financial news called him a visionary. Investors admired his discipline. Employees respected his intelligence. Strangers envied his life without ever realizing how painfully empty it had become. His mansion stood on a quiet hill overlooking the city, surrounded by towering gates, carefully trimmed gardens, and fountains that sparkled under golden lights every evening. It looked like something from a dream, yet inside its enormous walls there was only silence. Every room echoed with loneliness. Every expensive painting seemed to watch over a man who had forgotten how to smile sincerely. Alexander had once known happiness. Years earlier, before business consumed every hour of his life, he had been engaged to a woman he believed loved him. When his companies began expanding, he buried himself in meetings and endless travel, convinced that providing luxury was the greatest form of love. By the time he looked up from his work, she had already packed her belongings and left. She hadn't wanted another mansion or another expensive vacation. She had simply wanted him. From that day forward, Alexander convinced himself that emotions were earned headlines, but every celebration ended the same way, with him sitting alone in a mansion far too large for one person. His staff rarely spoke to him except when necessary. Most were intimidated by his reputation for perfection. He never raised his voice unnecessarily, yet his cold expression made everyone nervous. People respected him, but very few truly knew him. Then, on a rainy Monday morning, a new housekeeper arrived. Her name was Emily Carter. She was in her early 30s, dressed simply, with gentle eyes that carried both exhaustion and quiet strength. There was nothing extraordinary about her appearance by society standards, yet there was something deeply comforting about the calm way she moved through every room. She cleaned with patience rather than haste, often stopping to straighten family photographs that had gathered dust instead of simply wiping around them. Alexander noticed something unusual almost immediately. Unlike everyone else, Emily never stared at his expensive watches, luxury cars, or designer suits. She never tried to impress him. She greeted him politely, completed her work carefully, and left without lingering. To most people, Alexander Hayes was the billionaire. To Emily, he was simply another lonely man living in a very large house. Weeks passed. One afternoon Alexander returned home much earlier than expected. Walking through the library, he found Emily carefully dusting shelves filled with books that looked untouched for years. She paused before an old photograph hidden between two thick volumes. It showed a much younger Alexander standing beside his parents, all three laughing at something outside the frame. Emily gently cleaned the picture before placing it where it belonged. Alexander watched silently from the doorway. No one had touched that photograph in years. He realized she wasn't cleaning his mansion. She was caring for memories everyone else ignored. For reasons he couldn't explain, that simple moment stayed with him. Over the following months he found himself coming home earlier more often. He noticed the fresh flowers Emily placed on the dining table every Friday without guards during cold mornings. He noticed that injured birds somehow disappeared from the garden only to reappear healthy days later because she quietly cared for them behind the servants' quarters. Kindness seemed to follow her naturally. Not because anyone was watching. Because it was simply who she was. Alexander had spent decades surrounded by people motivated by ambition. Emily expected nothing. That difference fascinated him. Curiosity slowly became admiration. Admiration quietly transformed into feelings during evenings. Instead of eating alone in his enormous dining room, he sat near the kitchen while reading reports, secretly enjoying the comforting sounds of ordinary life. For the first time in years, the mansion no longer felt completely empty. Yet Emily never crossed professional boundaries. She remained respectful, kind, reserved. One evening Alexander learned why. While reviewing payroll records, he noticed Emily often declined overtime despite clearly needing additional income. Concerned, he asked his manager to investigate discreetly. The answer left him permanently disabled after protecting children during a terrible bus accident several years earlier. Insurance covered almost nothing. Medical bills consumed nearly every dollar she earned. She lived in a tiny rented apartment with peeling walls, unreliable electricity, and furniture older than she was. Yet not once had she asked anyone for pity. Alexander couldn't stop thinking about it. The next morning he anonymously paid Daniel's outstanding medical expenses through a charitable foundation owned by one of his companies. He expected gratitude. Instead, something completely unexpected happened. Emily refused more than her family. She explained that although life was difficult, accepting assistance without understanding its source felt dishonest. Alexander stared silently at the report lying on his desk. No one had ever rejected his generosity before. Days later he approached Emily privately and admitted the donation had come from him. He assured her there were no conditions attached. She thanked him sincerely. Then she declined again. Not because she was proud. Not because she disliked him. Because she wanted her brother to know their future had been built through dignity rather than dependence. Alexander couldn't understand. Money solved problems. At least, it always had. Why wouldn't she accept the help? The question haunted him. For the first time in his life, wealth had reached its limit. Instead of becoming frustrated, Alexander became curious. He began asking himself whether he had misunderstood generosity all along. He had always believed giving money was enough. Emily's refusal suggested something entirely different. Perhaps people sometimes needed respect more than rescue. Perhaps kindness wasn't measured by the size of a donation. Perhaps true compassion required understanding another person's heart first. Without realizing it, Alexander himself had started changing. He greeted employees by name. He asked security guards about their families. He began eating lunch with junior staff instead of executives. People around him noticed the difference immediately. His companies became warmer places. Productivity increased. Employees smiled more often. The transformation was reminded an extraordinary man that humanity mattered more than achievement. Still, one mystery remained. Why did Emily always seem both peaceful and deeply sad at the same time? Sometimes Alexander caught her staring toward the sunset through the mansion's western windows. There was longing in her eyes. Not regret. Not bitterness. Something heavier. As though she carried a promise she could never abandon. He wanted to ask. But something told him she would only answer when she was ready. Little did Alexander know about love, sacrifice, and what it truly means to be rich. And when that secret finally came to light, it would become the most valuable lesson the billionaire had ever received.